welcome to the debate.
It's good to be here.
We're tackling a giant today. Perhaps the giant, the monolith of Gothic literature that casts a shadow over basically every horror movie, every sci-fi novel, and, frankly, every ethical debate about bioengineering we've had for the last 200 years. Mary Shelley's Frankenstein.
Mm-hmm.
But we are not here to just recount the plot of a book that, let's be honest, everyone pretends to have read, but few actually have since high school. We're here to settle a specific, pervasive, and, I'll say it, frankly, irritating cultural argument.
You're referring, I assume, to the actually correction that every first-year literature student just loves to make at parties.
Exactly that. You mentioned Frankenstein, and someone immediately pushes up their glasses, takes a sip of their craft beer, and says, actually, Frankenstein is the doctor. The monster has no name. And, that's the surface level. We all get that. But we are going deeper today. We are addressing the second level of that sentiment, the modern revisionist take that has completely taken over the internet, Tumblr, Reddit, and even some academic circles. It's the idea encapsulated in that popular meme, you've seen it. Knowledge is knowing Frankenstein is not the monster. Wisdom is knowing Frankenstein is the monster.
It is a very catchy phrase. It feels profound when you say it, doesn't it? And it speaks to a very specific reading of the text, that Victor Frankenstein, the creator, the negligent father, the man who played God and then ran away, is the true villain of the story, and that the creature, well, he's just a tragic, misunderstood victim who just wanted a hug.
And that is exactly what we are debating. Is that wisdom, or is it nonsense contrarianism? Is it a sophisticated take, or is it just a way to sound smarter than everyone else while ignoring the actual body count? We are going to look at moral culpability versus causal responsibility. We are going to ask who the real monster is. The being who physically commits mass murder, who strangles children and frames innocent women, or the being who recklessly creates life and then just abandons it.
I think it's the central question of the novel. And honestly, to do this justice, we have to look at the 1818 text itself. Not the Boris Karloff movie with the neck bolts, not the parody sketches. We need to look at the raw, dense, philosophical text Shelley wrote. And we have to bring in other frameworks, psychological ones, like attachment theory, social theories regarding the other and Frantz Fanon, and even the philosophy of ambition itself.
I'll be taking the position that calling Victor the real monster is at its core intellectual dishonesty. It's a failure of moral judgment. I'll argue that the creature's actions, systematic murder, terror, framing the innocent, objectively define monstrosity, regardless of its trauma. Victor is flawed. Yes, a coward, even, but he is not the monster.
And I will be arguing that you simply cannot separate an action from its root cause. The creature begins as a tabula rasa, a blank slate. He is corrupted not by some innate evil, but by Victor's profound moral cowardice and a systemic failure of humanity. Victor is the architect of this tragedy. He embodies monstrosity through his negligence, his ego, and his absolute refusal to take responsibility for the life he forced into existence.
All right, let's get into it. I want to start by just dissecting this modern urge to exonerate the creature. There is this whole thread of commentary that suggests that calling Victor the monster is a sign of, deep empathy or superior understanding. I'm calling it nonsense contrarianism.
That's a very harsh label. Why nonsense?
Because words have meaning and actions. Actions have weight. To be the real monster, Victor would have to be worse than the creature. Logically, that's what the phrase implies. So let's just look at the ledger of crimes. Let's look at the text, specifically the body count. What does the creature do? He doesn't just act out. He murders William Frankenstein, a defenseless child. He strangles him. He then plants the locket on Justine Moritz, a completely innocent young woman in the Frankenstein household, knowing full well it will lead to her execution. He murders Henry Clerval, Victor's best and only friend. Then, for the grand finale, he murders Elizabeth Lavenza on her wedding night, strangling her in her bridal bed while Victor waits helplessly downstairs. He then proceeds to torture Victor psychologically for months across the frozen north. That isn't a victim. That's a serial killer. That is a terrorist.
You're listing the effects, the terrible, terrible effects, but you're completely ignoring the cause.
I'm listing the reality. And Victor, what is Victor's crime? He creates life in the heat of passion, maybe misguided, certainly arrogant, and then he abandons it. He is a deadbeat dad. He is negligent. But, in what moral dimension does child neglect equal serial killing? I mean, let's use a real-world analogy. If a father abandons his son and that son grows up to become a mass shooter, we might say the father was a bad parent. We might say he failed. We might even say his failure contributed to the tragedy. But we do not call the father a monster and the shooter a victim. We certainly don't say the father is the real monster. The person pulling the trigger is the monster. The person with his hands around the child's neck is the monster.
I see why you think that. And if this were a simple court case, you might have a point. But we're dealing with something much bigger here, a kind of metaphysical problem, not just a legal one. You are counting bodies, and that's fair, but you are ignoring the genesis of the violence. My entire argument rests on causal responsibility. Victor didn't just abandon a child at a fire station. That analogy is flawed. He created a new species. He violated the fundamental laws of nature to bring a sentient being into existence, a being with the capacity for immense suffering, and then he denied it any means of integration, any guidance, any survival.
But does that remove the creature's agency? That's the key. At some point, you choose to strangle the child. Victor isn't controlling his hands.
It contextualizes it so completely that it almost renders the question of agency moot at the start. The creature is a tabula rasa. We have to look at John Locke's concept here, which was hugely influential on Mary Shelley and her circle. The mind is a blank slate. There is no original sin in the creature. When he wakes up, do you remember the scene? The first thing he does is smile. He reaches out a hand to his creator. The text says later that he was, quote, benevolent and good. And he proves it. He saves a girl from drowning later in the book. He gathers wood for the DeLacy family in secret, acting as their invisible guardian angel. He tries again and again to be good. He only turns to violence after he is violently rejected by all of humanity, first and most devastatingly by Victor, then by the villagers, then by the rustic who shoots him after he saves the drowning girl. As the creature himself says, and this is the key line in the whole book, misery made me a fiend.
Misery made me a fiend. It's the most famous excuse in all of literature. It's the ultimate, it's not my fault.
It is the truth of his existence. And look at Victor's motivation. It was pure, unadulterated narcissism. He didn't create life to help humanity or to advance science for the common good. He wanted, and I'm quoting here, a new species to bless him as its creator. He sought glory. He wanted to be a god. But the moment that glory required responsibility, the moment the creature wasn't beautiful in the way he'd imagined, he ran away. And let's not gloss over Justine. You mentioned her death as the creature's crime, and it was. But Victor knew the creature killed William. He knew Justine was innocent. He could have spoken up. He could have told the court, I created a being that could have done this. He stayed silent to protect his own reputation. He let an innocent woman die to save his own skin. That is a monstrous moral failing of the highest order.
It is a failing, I grant you that. It is a severe one. But let's dig into the nature of this violence a little more. You call it a result of misery. I see something more modern and disturbing in the creature's psychology. I want to introduce a comparison that is made by cultural critics, including in an essay in the Objective Standard. The creature is the original incel.
Involuntary celibate? That is a heavy, very modern charge to lay on a literary figure from 1818. Are you sure that's not anachronistic?
But look at the evidence in the text. The creature writes what is effectively a manifesto. He corners Victor on the glacier at Montanvert and lays out his demands. He says, I am miserable and they shall share my wretchedness. His central demand is for a female mate. He believes he is owed a romantic partner. He essentially says, build me a girlfriend or I will kill everyone you love. And when Victor destroys the female creature, which, by the way, was probably the most responsible and ethically sound thing Victor did in the entire second half of the book,
because he realized they might breed a race of devils, the creature retaliates by killing Elizabeth. He punishes society, and specifically women, for his lack of romantic fulfillment.
I think you are projecting 21st century internet toxicity onto a 19th century existential crisis. I really do.
Am I? This is the logic of Elliot Rodger. It's the logic of the mass shooter who writes a manifesto saying, "The world rejected me, so I will make the world bleed." Feeling lonely or ugly or rejected, even unjustly rejected, does not entitle you to a woman. It does not entitle you to murder. When we sympathize with the creature on this point, we are dangerously close to the sympathy for the devil trap. We are excusing unjustified, targeted violence by framing the perpetrator as a victim of circumstance. I'm lonely, so I'm going to strangle a kid. That isn't tragedy. That's entitlement. It's monstrous entitlement.
I'm sorry, but I just don't buy that comparison. And let me tell you why. The incel comparison is profoundly superficial because it ignores the fundamental power dynamic. An incel is usually a person who, for all their complaints, has rights, has a place in society, but feels entitled to sex. The creature isn't just a guy who can't get a date. He is the ultimate oppressed other. We need to look at this through a post-colonial lens or even a disability studies lens, as scholars like Frantz Fanon or Rosemary Garland Thompson might suggest.
You think he's a revolutionary figure? A freedom fighter?
In a sense, yes. The creature isn't just lonely. He is ontologically denied humanity. He is denied the most basic communal acknowledgement. He tries to speak, he tries to help, he tries to learn, and he is beaten and shot solely because of his appearance, his non-normative body, to use the academic term. When he lashes out, it isn't the entitlement of a spoiled man who feels owed a girlfriend. It is what Fanon calls progressive violence, the violence of the colonizer rebelling against the colonizer, the slave against the master. He is asking for acknowledgement of his very existence. His demand for a mate isn't just about sex. It's about having one single being in the entire universe who does not look at him with horror. He says, and this is crucial, "My companion must be of the same species and have the same defects. This being you must create." He isn't asking for a supermodel. He's asking for someone who won't scream and vomit when they look at him.
That is a very, very charitable reading. But let's look at who he kills. He kills William, a child. He frames Justine, a servant girl. He kills Elizabeth, a woman. This isn't revolutionary violence against an oppressor. This is killing the weak to hurt the strong. It's terrorism. If he had just killed Victor, I might even agree with you. It would have been a form of justice. But he kills everyone around Victor. That is cruelty, pure and simple, designed to maximize psychological pain.
It is violence born of a system that left him no other language. Victor is the state, the creature is the stateless subject. But let's peel back the layers of why Victor failed him so spectacularly. We need to talk about attachment theory. Because the tragedy here isn't just Victor was mean, it's that Victor was psychologically incapable of connection from the very beginning.
Okay, let's put Victor on the couch. What's his diagnosis?
Well, if you look at the research, specifically Hannah Jackson's analysis in Scholar Commons, you can see a compelling case that Victor himself is a product of avoidant attachment. We have to look at his childhood. His own father, Alphonse Frankenstein, was well-meaning but emotionally dismissive. There's a key scene where young Victor finds the works of Cornelius Agrippa, an alchemist. He's thrilled, he runs to his father, all excited, and shows him the book. And what does Alphonse say? He glances at it and says, "Ah, Cornelius Agrippa? My dear Victor, do not waste your time upon this. It is sad trash."
Sad trash. It's a bit harsh, I suppose, but parents dismiss their kids' hobbies all the time. It doesn't usually create a monster.
But for a sensitive, intense child like Victor, that is a fundamental rejection of his inner world. Victor learns that his passions are trash. He learns to suppress emotion and focus solely on achievement, on proving himself. He becomes emotionally stunted. It explains why he withdraws from his family to study in Ingolstadt. He stops writing letters for months, for years. That is classic avoidant attachment. He equates intimacy with vulnerability, and he absolutely hates vulnerability.
So Victor is a victim of bad parenting, too. Is that what you're saying?
Exactly. It's a cycle of abuse, a cycle of emotional neglect. But here is the catastrophe.
Because Victor has an avoidant attachment style, he inflicts upon the creature the most damaging style of all, disorganized attachment. This happens when the primary caregiver, the parent figure, is simultaneously the source of comfort and the source of fear. The person who should soothe you is the person screaming in horror at you? Can you imagine the psychological break that causes? The very first face you see, the face of your God, looks at you with absolute revulsion and runs away. It shatters the psyche from the first moment of consciousness.
I want to push back on the moment of abandonment, though, because you paint it as this calculated rejection, this cold-hearted decision. But look at the text again. Victor had worked for months, nearly 2 years, in isolation. He was in a trance. He hadn't slept properly. He was physically and mentally ill. When the creature opens its dull yellow eye, Victor has a complete mental breakdown. He says, "The beauty of the dream vanished, and breathless horror and disgust filled my heart." He runs away in a sheer panic. He immediately falls into a brain fever that lasts for months. This wasn't malice, it was shock and physiological collapse. He didn't think, "I'm going to abandon this guy." He thought, "I need to get out of this room before I pass out or my heart stops."
That is a convenient excuse, and frankly a cowardly one, that the text allows Victor to tell himself, but it doesn't hold up. Victor spent months building this thing. He didn't 3D print it in an afternoon. He went to slaughterhouses. He went to charnel houses. He handled the eyeballs. He stitched the muscles. He knew it was 8 feet tall. He selected the features to be beautiful: lustrous black hair, pearly white teeth. The idea that he was suddenly shocked by its ugliness the moment it breathed it's superficial.
But there's a world of difference between a stationary object and a living, breathing thing with watery yellow eyes looking at you.
He rejected the creature because it wasn't the beautiful reflection of his ego he wanted. He wanted a new species to bless him. He wanted to be a god. When he got a yellow-eyed wretch instead of a golden Greek statue, he bailed. He couldn't handle the messy, imperfect reality of his own creation. It's the ultimate deadbeat dad move, but 1,000 times worse.
But again, I have to return to the core question. Does being a deadbeat dad, even a narcissistic one, even the worst one in history, make you a monster? There's a Reddit thread I saw on this topic that makes a very blunt but effective point. We do not call a bad parent a monster in the same breath as we call a serial torturer a monster. If a parent ignores their child and the child grows up and burns down the neighborhood, the child is the arsonist. The parent is a failure. One is a crime, the other is a tragedy.
But creating a life from scratch is playing God. And if you play God, your responsibilities are infinite. You cannot just walk away. Victor's failure is total and absolute. He didn't just leave a child at a fire station where society could intervene. He left a superpowered, confused, 8-foot-tall biological experiment loose in the Swiss countryside with the mind of a newborn. That is criminal negligence of the highest order. It is reckless endangerment on a global scale.
Okay, let's talk about that biological experiment aspect, because the appearance of the creature is key to why I think the monster label applies to him, or at the very least way the reaction to him is justified, if not excusable. We act like the villagers and Victor are just being superficial jerks judging a book by its cover, but Julia Kristeva, the philosopher, has this concept of the abject.
The abject, that which disturbs identity, system, order, the things we have to expel from ourselves to maintain our sense of self, like a corpse or an open wound.
Exactly. It's not just ugliness, it's something that triggers a primal biological sense of wrongness. The creature is described as having yellow skin that scarcely covers the work of muscles and arteries beneath. You can see the working parts. He has watery eyes set in dun white sockets. He is quite literally death infecting life. He is a corpse that is walking. So when Victor and the villagers react to him, they aren't just being mean or lookist. They are experiencing a deep evolutionary biological horror. They are seeing something that violates the fundamental boundary between life and death. You cannot blame a human being for recoiling from that. It is hardwired into our DNA to be terrified of the abject.
That's a compelling argument for why they fear him, and I agree that the reaction is visceral and perhaps unavoidable on a primal level. But have you considered that Victor himself ensured this reaction?
How so? He chose beautiful parts.
He built him that way. He made him 8 feet tall not because it was necessary for life, but because, as he admits, it was easier to work with larger parts.
He chose the translucent skin. And then, most crucially, he refused to name him. This is the naming argument, which you can see in analyses like the one in Diva Portal. Victor calls him the wretch, the fiend, the demon, the ogre. He never once gives him a name. Not Adam, not Prometheus, not even Specimen 1. Nothing.
Naming is powerful, I'll grant that.
Naming is the first act of love. It is the first act of inclusion into the human race. By denying him a name, Victor verbally banishes him from humanity before the creature even speaks a word. If he had given him a name, he would have acknowledged a relationship, a responsibility. By leaving him nameless, he relegated him to the status of a thing, an object, an it.
It is interesting then that, in pop culture, we call the monster Frankenstein.
It's the ultimate irony, isn't it? The public has instinctively given the son the father's name, correcting Victor's primary mistake for him. We acknowledge the lineage that Victor himself denied. But in the book, the creature is forced to find his own identity. He identifies with two figures from Paradise Lost, Adam and Satan. He says to Victor, "I ought to be thy Adam, but I am rather the fallen angel." He knows he was made to be good, but was cast out by his God.
I'm not entirely convinced by the "he was made to be good" line. He identifies with Satan pretty quickly, doesn't he? And let's be honest, he embraces the role. He says, "Evil thenceforth became my good." He makes a conscious, deliberate moral choice to lean into the villainy. He isn't a mindless beast lashing out. He is eloquent. He reads Plutarch and Goethe. He understands morality, and he chooses immorality.
Only after he was shot for saving a girl's life. Imagine that scene for a moment. He sees a girl fall into a stream and start to drown. His first instinct is pure benevolence. He jumps in, saves her, drags her to shore. And the girl's father, the rustic, sees him, panics, and shoots him in the shoulder. That is the definitive turning point. The world punished him for his one act of pure, unadulterated altruism. What lesson is he supposed to learn from that?
But he still chose murder as the response, and not just murder, calculated psychological torture. He killed Henry Clerval just to hurt Victor. He killed Elizabeth just to break Victor's heart on his wedding night. That is calculation. That is malice. That is not an animal lashing out in pain. That is a sentient being plotting exquisite revenge.
Okay, let's throw a wild card on the table. We have been debating this as if both characters are real and distinct within the fiction. But there is an academic theory, one discussed by David Orizar in The Arsenal, that suggests we might be reading this all wrong. The theory is that the creature does not physically exist at all.
The Fight Club theory that Victor is schizophrenic and the creature is just a hallucination?
Essentially. The theory posits that the creature is a paranoid delusion or an alter ego of Victor Frankenstein, a physical manifestation of his guilt and suppressed rage. Think about it. Victor and the creature are almost never seen together by a third party while both are alive and conscious. When the creature kills William, Victor is conveniently in the area. When Henry is killed, Victor is found nearby, delirious and raving.
It's a fascinating psychological reading, I'll admit that. It turns the book into a brilliant study of madness.
And it explains all the supernatural elements, doesn't it? How does the creature survive the Arctic without food or proper gear? How does he scale the sheer cliffs of Mont Salève with impossible speed? How does he always manage to find Victor in the middle of nowhere, whether it's the Orkney Islands or the Russian steppes? If the creature is a projection of Victor's mind, he doesn't need a map. He is always where Victor is.
And Victor himself confesses, doesn't he? He says, "I, not indeed, but in effect, was the true murderer."
Exactly. Maybe he meant it literally. Maybe the monster is just the dissociation of Victor's own violent impulses, the part of him that resented his younger brother William for being the family's golden child, the part of him that maybe resented Elizabeth for being this perfect, beautiful, but ultimately suffocating obligation he was saddled with since childhood.
I see why that's an appealing theory, and it makes for a great movie twist. But I have to stick to the text, and specifically the ending. Robert Walton, the framed narrator. At the end of the book, after Victor dies, Walton walks into the cabin and sees the creature weeping over Victor's body. Walton has a full conversation with him. Unless we assume Walton is also hallucinating, which breaks the entire frame narrative and makes the whole book a meaningless fever dream, then the creature is real. He is physically there.
True. The text, as written, supports the creature's physical reality via Walton. I concede that. But metaphorically, the theory still holds water. Even if he is real, the creature is Victor's shadow. He is the externalization of Victor's ego, his rage, his ambition, and his lack of discipline. Victor projects his own inner monster onto this being so he doesn't have to face the darkness within himself. The creature acts out everything Victor suppresses.
And that brings us to the societal aspect. Because there's an argument, one that I find quite potent, that calling Victor the monster is actually an attack on human ambition itself.
Defending the modern Prometheus.
Yes, in a way. John Devlin wrote about this in The Objective Standard. Victor achieved the greatest scientific breakthrough in history. He conquered death. He created conscious life from inert matter. That is the pinnacle of human achievement. It's the moon landing times 1,000. When we call him a monster for this, are we inadvertently demonizing ambition? Are we saying that man should not reach beyond his grasp?
I think we are saying that man should not reach beyond his grasp if he refuses to hold what he catches. It's about responsibility, not ambition.
But the critique often slides into a kind of Luddite anti-humanism. It suggests that the natural is inherently good and the scientific is inherently bad, that we should stay in our lane. Victor was a coward. Yes, he was irresponsible, but he was also a genius. The monster might actually be the culture that vilifies achievement while simultaneously excusing the violence of the oppressed. We excuse the creature's murders because he was sad, but we condemn Victor's brilliance because he was a bad father.
I think that is a fundamental misreading of the tragedy. We don't condemn Victor for the science, we condemn him for the humanity he lacked within the science. He treated a sentient being like a failed lab experiment to be discarded. And I would argue the real monster isn't a single person, but the society that Victor represents. A society that judges solely and brutally on appearance. Look at the De Lacy family.
The cottagers.
They were the good people in the novel. They were exiles, intellectuals, victims of injustice themselves. The creature learned language, history, and morality by listening to them through a crack in the wall. He loved them. And even they, the best of humanity, beat the creature viciously the moment they saw him. They didn't wait for him to speak. They didn't question. They saw a monster, so they attacked. If the good people are that prejudiced, what chance did the creature ever have with anyone else?
So society is the villain? That feels like a cop-out. It's the we live in a society argument. It dissolves individual responsibility.
It's not a cop-out. It's the necessary context. Look at the trial of Justine Moritz. This is the pivotal moment for me. Justine is accused of killing William. She is innocent. The evidence is entirely circumstantial. It's the locket the creature planted. But the court convicts her because she looks guilty, she acts confused, and the entire system is biased against the servant girl. The system failed Justine. The magistrates convicted her on flimsy evidence and public pressure.
And Victor stood by and watched it happen.
Victor stood by and watched it happen. He knew the truth. And how does he describe it? He describes his own agony during the trial. He makes it all about himself. Oh, poor me, I have this terrible secret and it's so hard for me. Meanwhile, an innocent woman is being led to the gallows. The system of justice failed. The system of family failed the creature. The system of education failed Victor by teaching him that reputation matters more than truth. Society creates its own monsters by refusing to embrace difference, and then it punishes the monsters it creates.
I acknowledge the societal failure. I do. But at the end of the day, individual responsibility has to matter. It must. We cannot just blame society for a pile of corpses. You cannot strangle your brother's fiancée on her wedding night and say, society made me do it. At some point, the chain of blame has to stop at the person who commits the act.
We're nearing the end of our time. We should probably summarize this ledger of monstrosity. We have Victor, the creator. We have the creature, the killer.
And we have society, the judge.
I will stand by my initial assessment, though I absolutely see the nuance more clearly. Victor Frankenstein is a negligent, arrogant, deeply flawed man. He made a catastrophic mistake. He was a bad father. He was a coward. All true. But the creature is a mass murderer. He killed a child. He framed an innocent woman, leading to her death. He strangled a man in cold blood. He murdered a bride on her wedding night. You cannot trauma dump your way out of accountability for serial killing. The definition of a monster is one who does monstrous acts. The creature is the monster.
And I maintain that Victor is the origin. He is the architect. He played God but acted like a petulant child. He created a being with the capacity for love, and through his own terror and neglect taught it only hate. He had every opportunity to fix it, to speak up for Justine, to fulfill his promise to make a mate, to just talk to his creation one time with compassion, and he refused every single time out of pride and fear. The creature is a mirror. He reflects the ugliness of his creator and the society that rejected him. The creature is the symptom. Victor is the disease.
There's one final point to consider, though: remorse. Because if we are judging souls, not just actions, we have to look at how they end.
Yes, we do. Look at the ending. Victor dies on Robert Walton's ship. What are his final thoughts? He justifies himself. He urges Walton to continue his quest for glory, but also to kill the creature. He warns the crew not to trust the creature because, and I quote, he is eloquent and persuasive. He takes zero responsibility to the bitter end. He dies thinking he is the tragic hero, the victim.
And the creature?
The creature weeps. He stands over Victor's body, his creator, his tormentor, his father, and he cries. He says to Walton, "I shall die. I shall ascend my funeral pile triumphantly and exult in the agony of the torturing flames." He says, "Polluted by crimes and torn by the bitterest remorse, where can I find rest but in death?" He recognizes his own wretchedness. He hates what he has become. He calls himself a wretch. He knows he is a monster.
It is a powerful contrast, and it raises the final unsettling question: does the capacity for remorse make the creature more human than Victor?
I believe it does. A true monster does not weep for its sins. A monster does not plan its own suicide to purge the world of its presence. Victor wanted to live forever in glory. The creature wants to burn to save the world from himself.
Or does the act of killing strip humanity away, regardless of how sad you feel about it afterwards? That is the hard line I struggle to cross. Remorse doesn't bring William back. It doesn't save Elizabeth.
No, it doesn't. And that is the core of the tragedy.
It is a story where the lines blur completely. Are monsters born, or are they made? And if they are made, who holds the chisel?
Perhaps the true horror of Frankenstein isn't the 8-foot-tall, yellow-skinned creature, but the inescapable, tragic cycle of abuse between creator and creation.
A cycle we are still seeing today in how we treat our technology, our children, and our others. It seems we haven't learned as much as we should have since 1818. Thank you for listening to the debate.
Until next time.